All right, so beloved, today we're going to look at the rise of Bible institutes, the rise of Bible institutes, and it might be just a little bit misleading, but I want to introduce you to several terms that have been used interchangeably and can be a bit confusing because we use them so very, very often, but each of them have a distinct meaning. Each of them have a distinct history, and each of them have a current purpose, and that's kind of what I want to go over to do today. Now, to do that, beloved, to do that, I'm asking that you would put down these various terms because I'm going to talk about them in depth and somewhat extensively today. So the first term that I want you to be familiar with and recording on your note taking is the term seminary. Seminary. The second term that is strongly attached to seminary is divinity school. Divinity school. And they are somewhat of a pair, seminary and divinity school. The third term that I want you to be familiar with is school of religion. School of religion. And then the fourth term is what the main thrust of today's lecture is about, and that is Bible institutes. Bible institutes. And of course, I'm going to talk about the rise and the history of Bible institutes. Now, these terms, seminary and divinity school and school of religion and Bible institutes, have been tossed about to and fro. They are somewhat confusing because a lot of times people will use these terms interchangeably, but they are not all the same. And I want to go through a rather rigorous approach to help you understand the difference between these different terms. And one of the reasons I want to do that is because, beloved, we're actually a hybrid. We are a blend, a combination of divinity school or seminary to some extent. And as I give you this background in history, you'll see where we differ in some of these specific areas. We're not as much a school of religion, but we're probably more of a Bible institute, 60-40 Bible institute, 40% seminary. And you'll, in just a few moments, understand the difference between these and understand why and what it is that we're seeking to do and that we're seeking to accomplish. So let me begin with seminary and divinity school. In the 17th century, that would have been the 1600s, beloved, there were many people who were called dissidents, 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 and they were fleeing the scourge and the oppression that was being applied to them by the Church of England. The Church of England had broken away from the Roman Catholic Church, and they were part of the Protestant Reformation. But the Church of England was as burdensome and as oppressive in England as the Roman Catholic Church had been in some other parts of the world. And there were some people who were part of the Reformation who simply did not go along with the Anglican or the position of the Church of England. You had Calvinists, you had Congregationalists, you had other branches of the Protestant Reformation, and they were all kind of grouped together under these two terms that I want you to be familiar with. One is the English separatist movement, the English separatist movement. The other term would have been the dissidents, meaning that they were not in compliance with the Church of England. Now, some of the groups that are more commonly identified in this area would have been the Puritans and the Pilgrims and some of the early pioneers who came to this country. And understand that in the 1600s, they were coming to this country to get away from the terror that had been applied to their religious life back in Europe. And so America, as a colony, as a pioneer, as a pilgrim. They came to this part of the world to escape the treatment that they were receiving back on the other side of the pond, back in Europe. And so we have 1600s, we have these groups that are coming who are anxious to do ministry, who want to come to a new world, and who also want to spread the gospel. So here's what I need you to understand, that the very first, please put this down in your notes, the very first schools of higher education, that would have been Harvard, Princeton, and Yale. All of those schools were organized for the express purpose of training clergy. Let me say it again. Now, I know later on they would go on and have business schools and medical schools and law schools and schools of public policy, but the original intent and focus of all of the first generation of schools of higher learning in this country, that would have included Harvard, Princeton, Yale, a little later on, University of Chicago. And of course, we would see an unfolding of additional schools around the country. But that first wave of schools was for the express purpose of training clergy to serve the church. Harvard, Princeton, Yale were all produced, all created for the purpose of training clergy that would serve the church. Now that's in the 1600s. About 100 years later, 1700s, early 1800s, there is a new academic discipline that emerges. Please put this down. It is called scholasticism. Scholasticism. It would give rise to the Age of Enlightenment. It is a academic descendant of the Protestant Reformation. But scholasticism, and I want you to get this, scholasticism emerged as an academic discipline that became more interested in the study of ministry rather than doing ministry. This is the time of Samuel Reimarus and William Reed and so many others who are now looking at the Bible as classic literature. They're looking at the church as a sociological phenom to be studied. And so we have this emergence of scholasticism. And with scholasticism comes this study of the church, study of ministry, and less of an appetite, watch this, and less of an interest in the study of doing ministry. So there is this divide, beloved. There is this divide that grows in this country in the 1600s and the 1700s between those schools who started out training individuals to do ministry, and then this later wave that becomes a discipline to study ministry itself. Not the doing of ministry, but more of an academic and a research mode and perspective for ministry. And that scholasticism turns these early training centers into research centers, research of the Bible, research of archaeology, a more academic or scholastic, and that's why the movement is called scholasticism. Now, that gives rise to the advent and the appearance of school of religion. And a school of religion is different than that first wave that had now become engulfed in scholasticism, in that schools of religion. And those of you who have gone to college, those of you who have gone to universities, you know that one of the areas of interest is what was called comparative religion. So a school of religion is different than the seminary, whereas the seminary, at least in the beginning, started out training ministers to do ministry. A school of religion has always been interested in studying different religions. And so they would study Islam, and they would study Hinduism, and they would study Confucianism. And they were more interested in comparing religions to see, what do all of these religions have in common? How do these religions differ from one another. So you have seminaries that began as training centers but became research centers, and then you have school of religion that from the very beginning of its inception was not concerned with doing ministry, but was concerned with comparing the different disciplines of religion. And those religions were many. Now, that brings us to the rise and the origin of the Bible Institute. And that's what I really want to talk about today, because what I want to say to you is that with the departure and the exit of the seminary and the divinity schools, those early seminaries and divinity schools, with the exit of them from the role of training persons to do ministry to now becoming research centers about ministry, that left a void and that left a gap. And that void and that gap was filled in the late 1800s, early 19th century by the rise of Bible institutes. And I've said all of that to kind of give you a background as to exactly what it is that I want to talk about today. So I've given you a brief overview, a brief history of seminary, divinity school, school of religion. And now I want to talk about the Bible Institute, because the Bible Institute returns to the task and returns to the assignment of training persons for ministry. That was begun in the 1600s. It was abandoned in the 1700s and early 1800s, and it is returned to at the beginning of the 19th century, because the institutions of higher learning were no longer specifically concerned about training people to do ministry. They were more interested in training people to study about ministry, so that your Harvard and your Princetons and your Yales were no longer producing preachers per se, but they were now producing college professors and individuals who would populate and fill academia for the study of religion, for the study of Christianity, for the study of ministry. And while those who went into ministry to practice ministry continue to go to these schools, it was always a struggle. Even in my own case, while at Harvard from 1976 to 1979, one of the complaints that we, the students who were headed to the pulpit and headed to parish ministry, we would always say to Preston Williams and other members of the faculty there at Harvard is, you know, you're giving us this stuff on ontology, deontology, form criticism, redaction criticism. You're introducing us to Rudolf Bultmann and to Paul Tillich and individuals of that sort. But, you know, how do you baptize? How do you do a wedding? How do you do a baby dedication? What are the tools of ministry? And of course, we were told, if that's what you want, go over to Andover Newton, because that's not what we're set up to do. That's not what we're designed to do. And so those of us who were headed to parish ministry had to be insistent and focused and committed to parish ministry, because we were actually being trained in those institutions. We were actually being trained to do something different than what we eventually saw ourselves doing in the future. And so that's why I want to talk about this gap, this niche that Bible institutes sought to fill in the early 19th century. And one of the reasons I say that New Life School of Theology is a hybrid is because there is a focus on academia. There's no way in the world that I was going to go through the experience of the divinity school and not share that with you. But I recognize and acknowledge that the vast majority and the purpose of those of you who are here are for the practice of ministry. You know, you go to medicine school to practice medicine. You go to law school to practice law. And so there needed to be a place where individuals could come for the practice of ministry, not the study of ministry, not the research of ministry, but the study of ministry. And so one of the things that I am attempting to do with this New Life School of Theology is to acknowledge the rich history and the rich tradition of the seminary tradition that has evolved over the years, but to stay faithful to the mandate and the assignment of preparing people to do ministry in the marketplace. So all of that is my introduction of the day. Now, again, while it can be confusing, there is a vast difference between seminaries, divinity schools, and Bible institutes. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide because that's what I have been talking about for the last several minutes. And hopefully you have at least a glimpse or an idea of how these schools differ. And while they all are religious sounding, they don't all have the same purpose. They all don't have the same intent. And so depending upon what it is that you are intending to do and where you see your career going, that determines what you ought to choose, because there's a vast array of directions and options that are available. But if you don't have this information and you don't know this background, you won't know how to differ, distinguish, and filter your choices and your decisions about your future. Those of you who are in Austin, Elder Cheatham and the grandmother of Bishop Soto, you know, they will tell you back in 1978, the people at Star of Bethlehem, they were just so excited to have a pastor who was a student at Harvard Divinity School. Wasn't nobody talking about, well, what is the purpose of a seminary? What is the purpose of a divinity school? Should our pastor be going to a vocational school to study the art of ministry and doing ministry? It's because of just how confusing this whole industry and category of theological training has been over the years and continues to be now. And of course, what my purpose today is to share with you that this is a hybrid of all three school types. I probably have less of an emphasis of school of religion. And while you will hear me at times talk about Islam, talk about Buddhism, talk about Confucianism, or make references and comparisons to other religious disciplines, actually what you're in here with New Life School of Theology is part seminary, divinity school, part school of religion, and a great part of a Bible institute that is focused and dedicated to teaching how to do ministry. And so today's lecture focuses upon the latter of these three school types, which is the Bible Institute. Okay, so let's get into it. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were a period of significant change and upheaval in America and culture. This period saw rapid industrialization, urbanization, and immigration. And so what I'm trying to say and suggest to you is that this time frame, watch where I'm going, beloved, this time frame that gave rise to the Bible Institute gave rise to it in part because of how complex culture and society had become. In the 16th and 17th century, America was an agricultural economy. It was very simple, it was very rural, but by the time we get to the late 19th century and the early 20th century, it became extremely complex, extremely diverse. Immigration, urbanization, people congregating in urban areas, the Industrial Revolution, the mechanization of the workforce and labor made both, watch this, society and culture an extremely complex place to live. Bible institutes were institutions of higher education that focus, watch this, on the study of the Bible and the training of Christian workers for ministry and evangelism. Now, again, one of the things that I hope that you have retained is that some of my teaching, much of my teaching, builds upon what I have taught you earlier. And one of the things that I've taught you is the advent of the First Great Awakening, which was 1730 to 1770. And more importantly, beloved, the Second Great Awakening, which took place between 1820 and 1840. So there is this immense, watch where I'm going, beloved, there is this immense revival movement that breaks out in this country between 1820 and 1840. As a result of that, there is this great thirst, hunger, and appetite to spread the word of God to as many people as possible. Now, that is interrupted by the Civil War. Remember, I said that the Second Great Awakening, and that would have included people like William Miller and Charles Finney of Oberlin College. This period of 1820 to 1840, and this zeal for spreading the gospel. You know, part of the Second Great Awakening was the interest and the excitement of Adventism. One of the aspects or characteristics of the Second Great Awakening, watch where I'm going, beloved, was this belief that Jesus was about to come. There was this interest in the eschatology and the apocalypse movement, and that we have the whole dispensational theology that arises out of this movement because of the belief that Jesus is about to return. Well, if Jesus is about to return, one of the prerequisites for him returning is the whole world has to be evangelized and has to hear about Jesus. And so we come out of this Second Great Awakening of 1820 to 1840 with this zeal for taking the gospel to everywhere around the world. However, that was interrupted in the 1860s because of the Civil War. When we get to the 1870s, the middle of the 1870s, and the Civil War is over and the country is trying to heal, there is this return of interest in evangelizing the country and evangelizing the world. And so that's where the very seedling of Bible Institute has its beginning, because there is this returned interest in evangelizing the world. But to do so, you have to have learned clergy or trained clergy in order to do so. These institutions differed from traditional theological seminaries in that they emphasize practical training and evangelistic outreach as opposed to academic study and research. So the Harvard, the Princetons, the Yales, the University of Chicago, Vanderbilt, all of those schools that started out training clergy had now become places of academic study and research, and had little interest, if any, in some instances, in training practical ministry for evangelistic outreach. And so again, there is this gap, there is this void, there is this need to train people on how to actually do ministry as opposed to study ministry, which had become the common practice in the more prestigious institutions around the country. So one of the earliest and most influential Bible conferences was the Niagara Bible Conference, which met annually, watch this, from 1876 to 1897 at Niagara-on-the-Lake in Canada. Now, I want to slow my roll here because I want to make sure that you understand exactly what I'm saying. So there is this gap, there is this need to train ministers. One of the events and activities that led to training ministers was this approximately 25-year period where ministers and laity would go to Canada, to this place that is pictured on the screen, from 1876 to 1897, and it was called the Annual Bible Conference. It was kind of like Hampton on steroids, but it was a coming together annually to pray, to preach, and to devote themselves to the practice of ministry. And one of the major contributors, get this, beloved, one of the major contributors to the creation of Bible institutes were these Bible conferences that had been held for many years and had promoted the idea that we need a place where individuals can be taught and trained how to do ministry as opposed to studying ministry. The conference was founded. I know I don't get an opportunity to give you questions because this would have been one of the questions that I would have placed in your study exam. But the conference was founded by a group of prominent American and Canadian evangelical leaders, including James H. Brooke, A.J. Gordon, and here is a name that you might be familiar with, D.L. Moody, Dwight L. Moody. These were the architects and the movers and the shakers of the Bible Institute movement. Now, again, there is this recognition that there needs to be places that hold as a priority and whose chief purpose is the training of ministers. Because even though ministers are being trained at Harvard and Princeton and Yale and Vanderbilt and University of Chicago, it's not the emphasis, it's not the priority. They are more interested in producing college professors and university professors, and pastors are almost a byproduct of those schools. And so people like James Brooks and A.J. Gordon and Dwight L. Moody said, no, we need schools that are going to make the training of ministers the priority, the chief focus, and not the creation or the production of university and college professors. So Bible conferences contributes greatly to the rise of Bible institutes. Another significant Bible conference was the Keswick Convention, which was held annually, and this was back in Europe, in Keswick, England, from 1875 to 1938. It was very similar to the Bible conference that was being held in Niagara. The convention was founded by a group of Anglican clergymen, including, as you see pictured here, Robert Wilson. Now, I need to kind of pause here because I think this is very, very important. In the case of the Niagara Bible Conference, these were prominent Protestant leaders, Calvinist, Presbyterian, who were part of the more radical wing of the Protestant Reformation. What made the Niagara Bible Conference different, beloved, than the Keswick Conference was more mainstream. They were sponsored by the Anglican Church, which was a mainstream denomination. Now, this mainstream denomination was pursuing holiness, and they were praying, and they had evangelistic outreach as their mission and their goal. But the difference between the two is that one was a mainstream approach to evangelism, while the other was a more radical Protestant approach to evangelism around the world. And so Robert Wilson, as it relates to the Keswick Conference, is the name that you certainly want to know and be familiar with. Now, so one of the contributing factors to Bible institutes would have been these Bible conferences, the Niagara Bible Conference, the Keswick Bible Conference. In addition to Bible conferences, early Bible societies, such as the American Bible Society, also played a critical role in the emergence of Bible institutes in America. So another reason that Bible institutes began to grow was because of the advent of Bible societies. These are institutions where people came together for the study of the. Now remember, for a very long time, the Bible was not available to the laity. The only people who knew what the Bible said was the priest. And so you didn't know what the Bible said. You knew what the priest said that the Bible said, or you knew what the church said that the Bible said. Well, you have Wilhelm Gutenberg and Martin Luther, who suddenly interpret the Bible, translate the Bible, and then mass print the Bible, so that for the first time in history, beloved, the Bible can be read by individuals. And this opens the door to what we call private interpretation, because now I don't have to just listen to the commentary of the church. I can read the Bible for myself, and because of the age of enlightenment, use reason and deductive reasoning and rationalism to come to my conclusions as to what the Bible means. So there is this magnificent growth of Bible societies that's taking place around the country and around the world. And because there is this enormous interest in Bible study, that opens the door and gives rise to Bible institutes. Why? Because people need a place to do what they have a new interest in doing. So the influence of the American Bible Society can be seen in the establishment of several Bible institutes. And these are places that began as a Bible institute. They didn't start as a seminary or a divinity school and morph into something else, but from the very first day, they were dedicated to the training of ministry, the training of ministers, and the study of the Bible for evangelistic purposes, for revival purposes. That would have included the Institute, the Bible Institute of Pennsylvania, which is now Cairn University, and the Bible Institute of Los Angeles, which continues today as Biola. Biola in Los Angeles, California, actually stands for Bible Institute of Los Angeles. And then, of course, the granddaddy of them all, in addition to the Bible Institute of Pennsylvania, the Bible Institute of Los Angeles, the Moody Bible Institute is one of the most influential Bible institutes in America and has served as a model for many other Bible institutes across the country. Now, I can't place enough emphasis upon this. I need you all to understand this. So whereas Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Vanderbilt, University of Chicago started out as a training place for ministers, morphed into research centers, became the corollary to schools of religion. Starting in the early 1900s, we have the outbreak of these Bible institutes. And one of the most influential, one of the most known, one of the most famous would have been the Bible Moody Institute. It was founded by Dwight L. Moody, and it has a rich and an enormous history. It did not see itself as a seminary or as a divinity school, but saw itself as a specific place where persons could come and be trained to go to the mission field and do evangelistic work. Again, this is against the backdrop of the Second Great Awakening, where the assumption was that Jesus was coming soon and the world had to be evangelized in order for Jesus to come. In addition to Moody Bible Institute, here on the East Coast, the major Bible Institute was Nyack College, which was founded in 1882 by Dr. Albert Benjamin Simpson, a Canadian-born Presbyterian minister and founder of the Christian Missionary Alliance, CNMA denomination. So Nyack was founded as a Bible Institute. It did not intend to compete with the Harvard, Princetons, and Yales, or the seminaries and the divinity schools. It did not see itself as a research center. It saw itself more aligned with Bible societies, these Bible conferences at the beginning of the 1900s. And it was the spiritual descendant of those who wanted to have a place for the training of Christian ministers. What is not here on the screen, so you have Moody Bible Institute, you have the Bible Institute of Los Angeles, you have the Bible Institute of Pennsylvania, now Cairn University, but another Bible Institute would have been Liberty College. And that's a very, very interesting history. I know that we have a lot of people who have been drawn to that, but that Liberty College is in this latter category of being more of a Bible institute. But as this next screen is going to intimate, what we have seen in recent years is a slow movement of Bible institutes to the category of seminary or divinity schools. So these places that started out as Bible institutes dedicated to training ministers, in recent years, 25, 30 years, there has been a slow incremental movement of changing these places, or they identifying with the older seminary and divinity school motif and tradition. And so a lot of the individuals who are graduates of Moody Bible Institute and Biola, and here of late, Liberty, see themselves as the equivalent of the older seminary and divinity school tradition. And of course, the unfortunate thing is that we have lost Nyack College. They ran into some financial difficulty and no longer exists. But the other institutions, and a lot of it has to do with accreditation, a lot of it has to do with the appetite or the desire to have an education that is interdisciplinary. Bible institutes were never intended to be interdisciplinary. By interdisciplinary, I mean that you can take that degree in one area or in one discipline and now go into another area, engineering, medicine, law, education, and use that as a contributing factor to another discipline. And so it's interdisciplinary. And so the whole accreditation process, and of course, the prestige that has gone along with seminaries and divinity schools over the year has created an interest, a desire, a pursuit of the same on the part of those institutions who originally were started for the purpose of training individuals for ministry. Well, that takes up just about all of my time. I certainly want to thank you for yours. Normally, I would give you a series of questions, but not so. This is just information for you to have, for you to consider, and for you to have available to you. Now, let me kind of come back to this. So I am a product of I am admittedly a product of a liberal theological education. And so I was trained in a seminary. And those of us who ended up in the pulpit in parish ministry, we had to resist the temptation because the emphasis and the pressure was put on us to become a college professor, to become a university professor, to take our degree and to use it in academia. But those of us who came from the church and went to the seminary with a commitment to the church, resolved to go back to the churches or the church tradition that we had come from. One of the reasons I say that we are a hybrid, because of my exposure and experience in terms of seminary, I have brought that information, that curriculum, that course, those courses of study to what I make available to you. But I am clear that I am not necessarily producing college and university professors, but I am producing people who can preach and lay hands and do revival and do ministry. And that's why I have chosen the term Bible College or New Life School of Theology, because it has a theological influence, but it has a continued dedication of producing individuals, training them to do ministry for evangelistic purposes. Amen. Amen. Amen.